Founder of the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, is out with a new book entitled Justice is Coming, How Progressives Are Going to Take Over the Country, and America is going to love it. I don't know if I'm going to love it, but apparently America will.
The book argues two main ideas. One, that progressives are correct on substantively these kind of policy issues, and two, America is actually a very progressive country. Millions of us know that we are part of something larger and that a movement is already transforming Washington. Cenk is here with us now to discuss. Welcome.
Thank you, guys. Great to be here.
So this was part of the Bernie 2020 pitch, obviously, that there's a genuine populist movement that just needs to be tapped into in the United States. And there were many aspects of that campaign that seemed to validate that reality, the fact that he out-fundraised everybody else in the race, despite not taking any corporate PAC money or billionaire dollars. But at the end of the day, seemed unable to squeak one out, both in 2016 and 2020. So what do you say to folks who push back against the idea that progressivism is actually popular, given that we have not had very much success in the electoral realm?
Yeah. So a decent amount of the book is actually dedicated to that. First, chapter 1 explains that it's indisputable that the country is progressive on almost every issue. I say almost just because maybe I couldn't find one, but every issue I looked at, the country is about 2/3 progressive. And so that might be shocking to people who are used to mainstream media, because why don't we win? Because of mainstream media. Mainstream media creates a mythology that this is a center-right country, a conservative country. It creates a mythology that corruption is perfectly normal, that taking corporate bribes is normal. It's not normal. It's what most corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans do. It has greatly corrupted our system, and most importantly, it has corrupted our media. The reason why I say it's most important is because that is where the voters get their information. If they get the wrong information, there's no way in the world they can make the right decision. And corporate media, mainstream media, has been lying to them for decade after decade after decade. Once we get past that monster, then progressives will easily win, because the entire country, at least on economic issues, for sure is progressive.
Yeah, I think, look, I think I have to admit, as someone who doesn't agree with a lot of what progressives have to offer in economics, although I'm sure we can find areas of agreement. Sure, the economic agenda being offered by the left is, I read polls too, regardless of what I think about it, is certainly more popular than what I would describe as the kind of elite social and cultural values that are not necessarily attached to policies, but are very hugely alienating to so many normal Americans. The issues beloved by the elites. So how do progressives get through then, or stop allowing college professors to speak on their behalf, or the woke employees at institutions that want to cancel everyone, that sort of thing that gets associated with progressivism and gives the whole project a bad name?
Yeah, so there's a couple of issues there, Robbie. Number one, corporate media, both, and when I say corporate media, that has the umbrella of what we consider mainstream media, like CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, NPR, et cetera, and right-wing media. They're both under corporate media. And so NPR might seem like an odd fit there, but it has the same exact groupthink as the rest of them do. And corporate media loves it when we engage in the culture wars. Go extreme left, go extreme right, tear each other to pieces, and don't look up, because the real people in power are above you. It's not the immigrant that came in without a dollar in his pocket, just crossed the border. He has no power at all. It isn't the LGBTQ person competing in sports in high school. That's not the issue in America, but it works brilliantly in tearing us apart. But the second part of it is a little bit true, Robbie, which is that some portions of the left have totally fallen into that trap, in my opinion, and are engaging in not only those culture wars, but only those culture wars. Brother, I need you to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So we can fight back against the right wing on those social issues, and at the Young Turks, we aggressively do that. But at the same time, I need you to focus on what unites us economically. Otherwise, we'll never be able to beat the people up top.
I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. Recently, I'm sure you're aware, there was some controversy among the left because podcast host and comedian Jimmy Dore recently made a sort of argument like this to Cornel West, arguing that he was overemphasizing resistance to white supremacy, at least in his rhetoric, if not in his campaign, and he was pushing him to focus more exclusively on economic issues. How do you see that trade-off, and do you think that there needs to be a kind of hierarchy of things like economics over racial or social issues, or in the case of the argument that Jimmy Dore was making, a focus on COVID and being anti-mandate and anti-moratorium over something like the fight against white supremacy?
Yeah. So this gets super nuanced. So let me walk through all of it as quickly as I can. First, the number one problem with Jimmy Dore's approach is he goes and mainly agrees with the right wing on social issues and then says, oh, I'm not going to agree that the vaccine doesn't work. Sorry, I'm not going to agree to things that aren't true. I'm not going to agree that the election was stolen. I'm not saying that Jimmy's saying that. I have lost track of what the crazy ramblings in his head or what he says out loud. But he keeps trying to bring the left over to the right wing. That's not how you do it. You say, look, it's not that you guys are moving your position or that we're moving our position. It's just that we're finding common ground in the places where we agree. Both of us can take yes for an answer, but you should not sheep herd your audience to the right wing. That is not at all productive. Now, in terms of hierarchies, like I said earlier, you don't need a hierarchy. Why do we have to debate and vote on, is this social issue more important or is this economic issue more important? It's not that hard to do both. It's not. So when they pass laws against trans people, gay people, etc., in these states, when they pass a law saying we shouldn't teach real African-American history in Florida, you could fight back against that. And at the same time, hey, Republicans, you know that 3/4 of you agree with us on paid family leave. We'll take yes for an answer. Come on, let's go do paid family leave together. Let's make sure that moms and dads have 12 weeks off after they deliver a baby. And so there's no reason in the world you can't do both. And once you get into hierarchies and prioritizing, that starts internal wars. Oh, you think class is more important than race? Oh, you think race is more important than class? And then all you're doing is fighting when you cannot win on economic issues unless you unite against the establishment. They're the ones that are actually in charge.
Speaking of sheep herding, there are some who are over the idea of working within the Democratic Party, who see the obstacles to actually winning as insurmountable after Bernie Sanders, who was better positioned than probably any candidate the left is going to have in generations, was thwarted the way he was thwarted by the Democratic Party. And now people are seeing the way the DNC is ostensibly rigging the election in various ways, not having any debates, saying that there will be no primary, changing the order of the primary contest, et cetera, in a way that makes it very difficult for insurgent candidates like Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. to advance in the polls. As a consequence of all of that, many people on the left are saying, I'm over participating in the Democratic Party entirely, are looking to third-party campaigns like Dr. Cornel West's campaign, and see those who would want folks to participate in any kind of electoral contest within the Democratic Party as doing exactly that, as sheep herding, especially when some of the people who might encourage one to vote for a Democrat ultimately in 2020 or 2016 and probably in 2024 are going to say at the end of the day, you should vote to defeat Trump and vote for the Democrat, even if they don't reflect the progressive values that you've said, and I agree, are so popular. What do you make of that argument?
So I think that rationality dictates that you have to understand the distinction between primaries and general elections. So the establishment says you shouldn't have primaries, especially on the Democratic side. You should just bow your head. Whoever's in charge, they get to dictate who should be the leader. And you progressives are rascals. You're so unruly. You must obey, right? If you listen to that, you're nuts. That is them totally brainwashing you. There should be a massive primary against Joe Biden. Poll out today, 72% of Americans think that he is not mentally capable of running again, that he's too old. 72%. And the lunatics in the Democratic Party and the lunatics in Washington go, yeah, we should run a guy that 72% of the country doesn't think could be president against Donald Trump. They say this is the most important election of our lifetimes, but let's run an addled, wounded antelope against this demagogue fascist. How does that make sense? That doesn't make any sense at all. There's just their lust and their greed for power is unbearable. So that's the primaries. And in the primaries, Marianne is at this point clearly the best candidate. It's not even close. Okay. But as you see there, there's one thing I wanted to quickly correct. Because in my opinion, I don't think the Democratic Party has much power at all. So they set the debates, they set this, they set that. I understand that, but they don't rig votes. They just set all the context. And I hate the rules that they set, and I think they're deeply corrupt. But that's not the number one problem. The number one problem is media. If Marianne Williamson got the same amount of respect and coverage in the media as Joe Biden did, Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy gets, then Marianne would be in a real contest with Joe Biden. But the media freezes her out, shames anyone who supports. Oh, she's not serious. Like, you morons are serious? You've ruined this country. But yes, when you get to a general election and somebody's sitting at 3% and the other two guys are sitting at 40%, well, brothers and sisters, I love you, but there is a reality that you are, in fact, taking a vote that would be against Donald Trump, and you're putting it in a category that is not going to win, and you all know that. I'm not saying today. I'm saying if you get to election day, and the polling still shows that, and don't give me this crap about, I don't believe in polling. I think 3% could magically turn into 51%. But if on that day, your candidate's definitely not going to win, why would you help Trump? Why? Why would you help him?
Well,
it just makes no rational sense to me.
Let me ask you this, Cenk. Why would the Democratic Party ever stop? You don't want to characterize it as rigging. I will. Rigging the primary, disallowing a primary. Why would the media ever stop putting its finger on the scale the way that it does? If voters ultimately validate that behavior by continuing to vote blue no matter who, no matter how bad the Democratic Party gets, and no matter how corrupt the DNC is, when does it stop?
Yeah, it stops when we win the goddamn primary. And by the way, that's impossible. No, it's not. Bernie came this close in 2016, and he came this close in 2020. He won the first three states. And who stopped him? Was it the Democratic Party that stopped him? No, it was corporate media that then heaped tons of negative coverage on Bernie. Can we get past corporate media? Of course we can.
You don't
I
think
know
it was the
it's
Democratic
super hard,
Party?
and that's their wall that's meant to keep us out, right? But look at us. You're doing it on Rising. We're doing it on Young Turks. And all of us are getting past it by having these conversations and having it reach the American people. Can a progressive win a primary? Absolutely. But we need to have progressives who try and who bring us together on economic issues like Bernie did in 2016. And then I guarantee you victory. That's also what the book is about. I guarantee you victory in 2028.
Cenk, you don't think that the Democratic Party played a role in Obama calling the leading candidates, including Pete Buttigieg, who at that point had done better than Joe Biden, and asked him to drop out after the South Carolina win? You don't think that that's evidence that the Democratic Party is willing to do whatever it takes to consolidate around a non-progressive candidate?
Briahna, I don't disagree with you 1%. That's not what I'm saying. I know Obama did that. I know that the so-called moderate Democrats, who are actually corporate Democrats, coalesced. By the way, Elizabeth Warren has done many great things in her career. You cannot wipe that away. But her not coalescing with Bernie, both in 2016 and critically in 2020, cannot be forgiven. It was just, when they coalesce, we have to coalesce. Anyways, but Briahna, what I'm saying is that was not the critical factor. Obama can get all of the corrupt Democrats together and all the corporatists together, and they can go, whoa. But if the media doesn't then smear Bernie and doesn't elevate Biden, it doesn't work. It's the media that's the critical part. The Democrats try to rig elections, but if the media didn't play along, that plot would not have worked at all. Bernie would have won the fourth primary state, and it would have been over. We were so close. My problem with progressives in Congress is we got near the goal line, and now they're going backwards. And they're going, oh, corporate Democrats, we bow our heads. We all endorse Joe Biden. Are you nuts? What are you endorsing Joe Biden for? He's a terrible candidate. He's a weak candidate. He's going to lose. He's not very progressive. And you endorse him without getting anything in return? Don't you know even elementary politics? Use your leverage, for Christ's sake. Guys, you've got to trust me on the numbers. We're going to win these primaries. And mainstream media gets weaker by the day, and we get stronger by the day. Those primaries are ours. It's just like even today, why don't we have a more forceful primary against Biden? Because while the media whines and complains about Biden, the minute that anybody steps in the race, they go, "How dare you put your head to the leader?" If you're a Democrat and you're a progressive, are you nuts listening to corporate media? No, do not ever listen to corporate media. Their job is to lull you back into sleep and make sure that you love the status quo and that you obey corporate rule. Do not do that. Go and fight in the primaries. It is not at all too late. Look, if these are the only choices we have, voting for Marianne Williamson in the primary is the biggest no-brainer a progressive should ever have. There's no reason in the world to vote for Biden. She's both a stronger candidate and a more correct candidate.
Jake, let me ask you this before we go, and I'm sure you get into some of this in your book. I think you're so correct to rail against the mainstream media, the corporate media, and the choices that they make. And obviously we're part of a corporation, so I guess I can't say we're not corporate media, but we try to platform and celebrate alternative narratives like your own. But let me ask you this, because you went after Jimmy Dore a little bit a minute ago. I've noticed that in a lot of these independent and alternative media spaces, voices we've featured on the show before, people who got big by having very pro-Bernie Sanders audiences and messages, have had, if not a right-wing drift, I'm not sure that's in the direction of progressivism, or it's not in the direction of normal Bidenism either. It's in a direction, I think, of being more open to the right, people whose audiences, I think, have that perspective, like Glenn Greenwald's audience, Russell Brand's audience. We're going to be talking about Russell Brand later today for anyone watching this right now. That kind of thing. How does that square with your thesis on the inevitable takeover of progressivism?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. Number one, people are getting so frustrated with the Democratic Party because they almost never deliver that they're looking for alternatives. I mean, look, as a meta issue, that's why Trump won in 2016 in the first place. The country is so deeply anti-establishment, except no one on TV will ever tell you that, because they are the establishment. They're not going to come on TV and go, "Hey, by the way, country, I'm going to end the gaslighting here. It turns out you guys all hate us." They're not going to say that, okay? So that is the absolute reality here. So, but when you get into the Jimmys of the world, there's audience capture and there's financial interests, and then some have just lost their minds, in my opinion, okay? And so, for example, Jimmy does a video that's pro-vaccine. It doesn't get a lot of views. He does one that's vaccine skeptical. It gets a lot of views. Guess what he does next? 20 more videos that are vaccine skeptical. That's called audience capture, and you partly do it for the ego, and you partly do it for the money, and it takes strength not to go in that direction. And the right wing is going and capturing these hosts one by one, and everybody has their different things. Look, I don't know Russell Brand and Glenn Greenwald's situation, but I do know that sometimes if some people have done terrible things, where are you going to go? You're not going to go to the left, where they're going to out you and they're not going to support you. You're going to go to the right, where they circle the wagons and they say you can do anything you want as long as you agree with us.
Cenk, I have to offer some, I think, pushback there. One, on two fronts. One, I do think that you're accurately describing a psychological phenomenon where if people are getting a lot of criticism and pushback, some of which they perceive to be bad faith, there is an inclination to spend more time with people who have been nicer. I'm not saying that's a moral choice, but it is an obvious psychological outcome. And does that mean that people within the left community should perhaps extend more grace to each other so that that doesn't actually happen? And the second, I would just want to ask you about, similar accusations, I feel I would be remiss not to bring up, that have been made about your network, Young Turks, about the $20 million of Katzenberg money that some people have argued changed the direction of TYT's coverage in a more liberal and less left direction.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll take it one at a time. Should people show each other more grace on the left? Absolutely. At the same time, you notice a phenomenon. It's okay to point it out. So it's okay for us to point out what Jimmy does with his videos is super obvious. It's one thing to criticize the Democratic Party. As you can tell from this interview, I do it very regularly and very forcefully. It's another thing to say the Republicans are okay. The Republicans are not okay. The Republicans are a disaster. The Republicans are much worse than the Democrats. Okay, now on to the second issue. Yeah, so then people go and look around and they go, okay, well, oh, the Young Turks got 20 million investment. Okay, now here's the things people don't know. People say Katzenberg was involved, no question. The amount he has is near microscopic. And and by the way, we pay the money back. So I be honest, that's breaking news. We've never told anyone that, but we did. So that has no influence on us. But most importantly, Briahna, people just make up that we went towards the right wing or went towards the moderate Democrats. I mean, they call me like those that the lunatic fringe that follow Jimmy say we're establishment shills. They haven't watched 1 minute of the show. I mean, look at what the things I said to you before this question, right? Does it look like a 1% pro-establishment? But they will see that and go, aha, nail it, he's for Hillary Clinton. Well, look, I can't help you if you're not dealing with facts and logic. You can't show anything where we're in favor of Hillary Clinton.
Well,
no one fights
help you,
harder in the
Cenk.
primaries against corporate Democrats than TYT does, Young Turks does, and I do. I formed the Justice Democrats to fight against corporate Democrats, and we defeated them. There's nothing more practical and more real than what I did there in that instance.
I mean, Cenk, I think specifically one of the moments that I remember of TYT being characterized as no longer capturing the spirit of the Justice Democrats or what the Justice Democrats were supposed to do was the moment around Force the Vote, where there was a push for the elected squad members to take an adversarial relationship to the Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi specifically, to withhold their votes for them the same way that we've now seen the Freedom Caucus model with withholding their votes for Kevin McCarthy at the beginning of this year, really testing the theory of how that would work and getting in return a number of concessions that I think we can all acknowledge would be amazing for the left to have achieved. And at that time, despite there being a poll that TYT put out of its audience, where a majority of the TYT audience seemed to support Force the Vote, the newscasters, the personalities on the show, were very much against it. And as I'm sure you can remember, that caused a significant rift down the left that persists in many ways. What do you say to that? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, it's crazy. But thank you for bringing it up, because I'm happy to address it and try to clarify it the best I can. Guys, do I look like I don't want to force votes? Of course I do, right? And I tell every congressperson that's going into Congress for the first time, if they'll listen to me, I tell them, you have to create what the civil rights movement called good trouble. Now, that doesn't mean you go in wildly and flailing around doing impractical things, but it means you come up with a coordinated strategy, you then create good trouble, and then you put a spotlight on an issue where you are on the winning end of it, popularity-wise. So, for example, one of the things we did with Justice Democrats is as soon as AOC won, we did a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office. That put Green New Deal on the map. That put Sunrise Movement on the map. And in a lot of ways, it reinforced Justice Democrats being on the map. I want you to take those kind of actions. But you have to actually use your mind and independent judgment as to which action to take. So Force the Vote, Jimmy comes to me. Back then, we're still friends and allies. And I go, oh, look, it sounds like a pretty good idea. Okay, I definitely want to do something where we're forcing action, right? So what's your plan, Jimmy? He's like, well, we're going to force the vote, and we're going to, get Medicare for all. I'm like, brother, I want Medicare for all. But you have to take steps. You have to take steps. If you go straight to Medicare for all, you have a 0% chance of it passing, and you're going to waste the power and the leverage. And who are you going to get as Speaker of the House? And he's like, I don't know. That's your strategy? No, I'm not going to agree with a moron who has no strategy, no plan, not at all practical. We could have forced the vote on $15 minimum wage, and we could have won that vote. But instead, the force the vote were like, yeah, well, you didn't do what I wanted. Okay, then I'm out. I'm not going to help you guys actually get the bills that we all want. Oh, come on, man, grow up.
Now, so Cenk, I would point out that Kevin McCarthy is still Speaker of the House. The issue was not whether or not Nancy Pelosi would necessarily become Speaker. The left, people
Briahna,
like yourself. Wait a minute.
Who is going to replace Nancy Pelosi? Did you guys have a candidate? Who?
Cenk, if I could, the right-wing caucus got a number of meaningful concessions, regardless.
But that's not what we were going for, Briahna. That's exactly the problem. If they said, let's go for meaningful concessions, I would have been in. They said, we're going to get Medicare for all.
Cenk,
sure
with all
we
due
are.
respect, your characterization of what happened, I think, is reflective of the lack of grace and communication that was happening among the left at the time. And I think if people had been less motivated by their personal animosities against each other, it seemed that Jimmy Dore, you've expressed some animosity toward him several times during our short conversation here. I do think if those personal animosities weren't at play, maybe we could have been in a world where you were listening to myself, Crystal Ball, Kyle Kulinski, other figures on the Cornel West, Chris Hedges, who were also advocating for this and who were being very clear that there were any number of demands. I wrote an article in Current Affairs that set all of this out contemporaneously, so you can go back and look, that it wasn't this idea that we were going to hold the vote and magically get Medicare for all. And to the extent that that was your presumption
Briahna,
or your
you know
belief, I do think that that is a real problem
Name
in
one other
communication on the
concession
left.
that you guys wanted at the time. Name one other concession. At the time, don't make it up now. At the time, name one other thing you guys wanted.
I invite you and the rest of the audience to go look at an article I wrote in Current Affairs magazine in November of 2020, in which I consulted with David Sirota and included a list of subsequent ancillary demands that he had written up in his own publication, and I linked to them and say that these are also important. The important thing is that we need to demand something in exchange for our votes. But we don't need to rehash that. Go ahead. I'll give you the last.
No, I need to say one last thing, Briahna. I need to say one last thing. You guys make it sound like we're the ones who have animus. No, be clear about how this thing started. As I told you in the beginning, I said, well, that's interesting. Let's have a conversation about strategy. And the minute I said, let's have a conversation about strategy, Jimmy said that we were taking money from the CIA and Nancy Pelosi. You just mentioned David Sirota. He also attacked David Sirota. He also attacked Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! And insinuated she was working with the CIA. So then I thought, well, no, I'm not going to work with a lunatic who thinks that Amy Goodman might be working with the CIA. And second of all, I didn't start the fight. This lunatic comes in frothing at the mouth. I'm being funded by CIA and Nancy Pelosi. How are you supposed to have a rational conversation with an absolute lunatic like that? And then you guys think we started it? Are you insane?
I didn't say you started it. I don't care about the personalities. Cenk, you're talking about personalities. I'm talking about issues. All I know is that David Sirota supported Force the Vote. I had him on my podcast talking about it many times.
That's not true.
Yes, he did.
No,
and he
didn't.
continues to be an advocate that I value and respect a great deal. And he is able, as a mature person, to tease away his personal feelings about human beings that he might share an idea with or a strategy with, and the underlying strategy. And I really do hope that we see more of that on the left and less of a focus on who it is that's delivering a certain kind of a message, especially if you're right, Cenk, and it's going to require a united and powerful independent media force in order to actually ever get a progressive into office. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking through some of these tough issues.
No problem. And you guys are funded by the CIA. But I'm sure you won't take offense at that. So just be cool. Be cool. Let's agree on policies. But you're obviously, Briahna had bought her house, has a Mercedes and a Rolls Royce, all funded by Hillary Clinton and the CIA. But it's cool. It's cool. Let's stay friends.
About the only thing Briahna has convinced me of on this show is that there is, in fact, more dysfunction on the left than on the right. And today is a good example of that. Thank you very much, Cenk.
That, unfortunately, is true.
Have a good one.